Polio, or infantile paralysis, is a highly infectious disease caused by the poliomyelitis virus that lives in the throat and intestine. As the name implies, the disease mainly affects young children under 5 years of age and can often be fatal. Polio is spread by person-to-person contact and can only infect humans. Initial symptoms of the virus can include fever, fatigue, vomiting, headache, and pain or stiffness in the neck and limbs. However, perhaps the most detrimental symptom or effect of the virus is permanent paralysis. In fact, approximately 5 to 10% of cases result in death when respiratory muscles become paralyzed and breathing stops. On the other hand, 95% of people infected with poliovirus show no external symptoms but still transmit the virus. Epidemiologically, polio is not a new disease. The oldest reference comes from a 3,000-year-old Egyptian stone engraving. In ancient times, cases tended to be rare due to poor sanitation. Infants built up immunity by acquiring maternal antibodies via the placental route. Exposure throughout life provided continual immunity boosting, and thus infections were rare. With improvements to waste disposal and the widespread use of indoor plumbing in the 20th century, polio epidemics began to occur regularly in the developed world. Infants were far less likely to be exposed to polio naturally and gain protective immunity. As our society improved its sanitation, individuals were more likely to be exposed to the virus later in life, if at all. However, when older children and adults become infected, they are more likely to be paralyzed or killed by the disease. Because the wealthy were the first to benefit from improved sanitation, they were often the first to be affected by these epidemics. Franklin Roosevelt, perhaps the most famous polio survivor, was a victim of this phenomenon. Before the 1950s, there was no effective treatment for poliomyelitis. Awareness of its route of transmission often hampered attempts to control it. During the 1950s, researchers Albert Sabin and Jonas Salk developed effective vaccines against the virus. A widespread immunization campaign rapidly brought it under control in developed countries. The Salk vaccine is an injection of chemically killed virus which teaches the immune system to recognize the virus and eliminate it. It is known as inactivated poliovirus vaccine. This vaccine confers lasting, but not always lifelong, immunity. Sabin's vaccine is given orally and hence known as oral poliovirus vaccine. It contains attenuated live viruses of each of the 3 polio serotypes. The attenuated virus replicates in the patient's intestinal tract and induces immunity, but is not virulent enough to cause paralysis except in rare cases. In the immediate pre-vaccine era, 13 to 20,000 paralytic cases were reported annually. Following Sabin vaccine's introduction in 1955, the incidence rate dramatically decreased. This steady decline continued following the introduction of the oral vaccine in 1961. The last cases of polio caused by endemic transmission of wild virus in the United States were in 1979. In 1994, the Western Hemisphere was declared free of indigenous poliomyelitis. In 1988, when the Global Polio Eradication Initiative began, polio paralyzed more than 1,000 children worldwide every day. Since then, 2.5 billion children have been immunized against polio thanks to the cooperation of more than 200 countries and 20 million volunteers, backed by an international investment of more than $8 billion. Today, polio has been eliminated from most of the world and remains endemic in only a few countries, including India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nigeria. In 2009, fewer than 2,000 cases were reported for the entire year, 95% of which were vaccine-associated. Several more countries had continual outbreaks in 2010 due to importations of the virus. The Global Polio Eradication Initiative is spearheaded by the World Health Organization, Rotary International, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the United Nations Children's Fund. The global polio eradication effort is built upon the moral imperative of reaching every child with an available health intervention. Through the synchronization of supplementary immunization activities, many countries have established a new mechanism for coordinating major global health initiatives aimed at reaching all people and establishing a model for regional and international cooperation for eradicating the disease.